I would like to welcome on stage, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Tom Crowther, who's the founder of Restor, and we can start the session right away. Thank you very much and enjoy the session.
Cheers. So I think it's going to play the video now. And I don't actually want to be on stage for it.
Simply it's life. Without forest, without trees, no life will continue. So for me, it's life.
Oh, I could spin you one hell of a yarn. I could tell you about how waters once teemed with life and grasses rustled, parting for the bodies of big beasts and the nudge of small ones, and how we now often find ourselves
in silence. But by now, you know that story. So I'm going to keep it simple. And simply, I want to introduce you to Restor, a home for hope and collective action, a global community working to protect nature.
Because all I know, and I know for sure, is that if we don't protect biodiversity, we're in deep shape.
Coffee is one of the most industrialized, cultivated crops, and for me it's important to show that there is another way. The more diversity we have, the more safe a system is. So you embed the farm in the forest, in an ecosystem that sustains itself. Yeah, to get that soul again, we have to acknowledge that we need each other for growth. A human being, our communities can only grow in exchange with each other.
And there are hundreds of thousands of initiatives like this across our planet, led by local farmers, communities, and businesses.
Imagine a platform that allows us to see this entire movement, where we can engage with just the click of a button. A platform that not only allows you to help the movement, but to become a part of it. Because when you know exactly where your goods come from, you have the power to impact global restoration with every product you choose.
We have a chance to not only imagine, but to enact something different. This time we're in will be looked back on. So the real question is, what did you do?
Mr. Bean finishes it off. Thank you. Starting again.
Simply without forest, life.
One moment. Sorry.
No, I want uncollective.
I mean, that is better than the speech I'm going to give, so we can just redo it. I don't actually know how to get off it. Here we go. Oh, we're in. All right, we're straight in. Change is mental. We are all facing astronomical change. And I think what's worth noting, it's worth remembering that change is also the only constant in our universe. And if we're going to really create the change that we want to see in this planet, it's worth noting what we really mean by change. And I think in order to do that, we have to go back to the beginning. The start of the universe is when it all started, really. You know, we had matter distributed everywhere, and it's subtle fluctuations in that early matter that gave change the toehold to get moving. And that toehold happened through these immense forces known as feedback loops. When matter, regions of high density pulled in more matter, making them more dense, which pulled in more matter, making them more dense still. And this process grew exponentially until they created stars and all of the matter all the structure in our known universe. And it's these feedback loops that a few billion years later ultimately gave rise to the magic of life on our planet. And it's those continuing feedback loops that allowed it to spread. The more life spread, the more habitable it got for more life. And the more species that emerged, the more niches and opportunities there were for more species. This magical feedback loop of life creation ultimately created the Eden that we are all aware of today, this magnificent system that provides every single thing that we have ever depended on for our entire existence. But as we're aware, the sounds of nature are now fading, and they're gradually turning into this. This is a real image generated by artificial intelligence to show the impact of a human feedback loop, where increased growth leads to increased exploitation, leading to more growth, leading to more exploitation. But this isn't just an environmental challenge, this is a social challenge. Because there's not a single location on the planet where a degraded landscape like this is more valuable to the local people who live there. But if we're going to revitalize these landscapes, it's critical that we understand the feedback loops that underpin this pattern. Because if we don't, it can give rise to very misleading or even dangerous implications, as I discovered personally back in 2019, when our young group of researchers wanted to do an innovative new study to explore the extent of our global forests. We mapped the scale of the global forest system for the first time, showing that our Earth is home to just over 3 trillion trees. It was a staggering new scale of our understanding. We were immediately criticized for missing the trees in the Vatican City, so we have updated the number, but it's now up to date and everyone's very happy with it. But these models don't only help us to see where trees exist now, they also show where they would naturally exist. And these models helped us to realize that we've almost halved the scale of this incredible global forest system. But those models also reveal the land of opportunity. Outside of the urban and agricultural areas that we use extensively, there's about 0.9 billion hectares of land that is degraded because of past human use. And these are not intensively managed or used by people. And so we thought, great, this is an opportunity for recovery. And these lands, if they could be revitalized to their full health, would be able to support about 1 trillion new trees, which would, in their healthy, diverse, complex ecosystems, be able to capture about 200 billion tons of carbon. That's about a third of the carbon we need to draw down in the fight against climate change, which was very exciting, but also unbelievably overwhelming when it suddenly hit the news. It was chaos. It was front page news in every country in the world. Suddenly it gave rise to the launch of the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, the decade that we're in now. It also gave rise to WWF's Trillion Tree Campaign and then another Trillion Tree Campaign from the World Economic Forum, and suddenly momentum seemed to be growing. There was a feedback loop spiraling out of control. And when the President of the United States starts planting trees on the White House lawn, you start to wonder if maybe it's gone a little bit too far, because it seems a little bit too good to be true. And unfortunately, that's exactly what it was. There was huge misconceptions around what this means. To many people, they were seen as an opportunity to plant vast rows of carbon-capturing trees, massive monocultures that would grow at the expense of everything else, the classic utilitarian approach that we've had that's led to the degradation that got us into this state. And this isn't only dangerous for climate change, it's obviously devastating for biodiversity. And it gave rise to a really dangerous period of academic controversy that undermined confidence in the environmental movement. For me personally, it was a particularly dark time. We were criticized by the scientists I respect most in this world, saying our numbers were too high, our numbers were too low. I was called an armchair ecologist for sitting behind global models and making inferences about the rest of the world, and there were more creative insults along the way. And then soon it gave rise to the headlines that rather than focusing on the incredible potential of nature to help us, they were focusing on the risks of restoration done wrong. And now, obviously, every single person in this room is abundantly aware that this is completely correct. Of course, the wrong tree in the wrong place will do much more harm than good. But it's worth noting that that's also the case for everything that has ever existed. You stick a toothbrush in the wrong place, I'm sure you'll do more harm than good, so I'm told. Of course, we can't be engineering our way out of this situation by banging trees all over the place. This is not about an engineering human challenge, because the power of nature is inherently in its complexity. Those feedback loops only start building when you have every species depending on other species to survive. This is the power of nature. And that's why healthy, complex ecosystems will store way more than 50% of the carbon that monocultures of the equivalent species would. And they will store that carbon for vastly longer times because they're much more resilient, as we're all aware. So when we're talking about global restoration, we're not talking about banging trees in the ground. It's about protecting what we possibly can and revitalizing where there are opportunities to do so. And those opportunities aren't just about farming carbon. They are about reconnecting nature's feedback loops, the broken links in the chain that would otherwise prevent it from spiraling up and having incredible recovery. One of the most common chains in that loop are the microbes. Often a handful of healthy microbes into a degraded soil is enough to spark ecological recovery. This is being done now by several organizations like Funga and Oath, where they're driving restoration across hundreds of thousands of hectares. Similarly, animals, these are the vectors of the spores and seeds and nutrients. They are the life of our landscapes, and when they are allowed to move across landscapes, suddenly those landscapes can spark back into recovery. But by far the most important component of these ecosystems and these loops is us, the ecosystem engineers that have lived in association with these ecosystems for eternity. But unfortunately, right now, this is the biggest breakage in the feedback loop. The single biggest driver of degradation, unfortunately, is the inequality that we see, particularly in rural areas. We have a massively skewed economy with several of us with massive environmental footprints and then billions of people trapped in an economy that gives no non-extractive alternatives. If you are forced to degrade the natural capital around you just so that you can meet your daily needs, of course that is going to deplete the ecosystems around you, whether you wanted to or not, and that is going to only drive, it's going to reinforce that poverty, continuing that feedback loop that has been spiraling for the last century or so across our entire planet. This is the single critical feedback loop that needs to be reversed if we're going to have a chance of getting our way out of this. But the thing about feedback loops is that they're unbelievably powerful. And once you, rather than pushing back against them, if we can start to lean into them, they can actually use some of that momentum to steer in different directions. And of course, in this case, there are two places where we have the potential for interventions. A low-hanging fruit, I would argue, is on the right-hand side, where when we can turn, in the instances where we have the opportunity to turn ecological degradation into recovery, that in a particularly focused in the ways that revitalize livelihoods, that is when you can start this feedback loop to spiral in the different direction, because that only incentivizes more ecological recovery. And that was actually the original theory, the basis for the creation of Restor. This online international network of scientists came together to create this online network that allows anyone anywhere to draw around an area and get free ecological data about the species and the biodiversity and the carbon and the water in those locations. So if you go onto Restor now, you'll see the massive footprint of agriculture. But as you zoom into certain areas, you'll see farms that look like this, like the one in the video at the beginning. This is a farm that looks exactly like a forest because that's exactly what it is. These coffee trees are planted underneath the canopy in Desta's farm, and that means the forest traps water and nutrients, so those trees grow without the need for fertilizers and irrigation. And as a result, in this particular location, his trees are more productive than those in the nearby farms, which is an obvious equation. It makes sense then, once that feedback loop is spiraling, that all the farmers in the nearby landscapes would want to do the same thing by allowing trees to recover on their farms to be more profitable. So this is the challenge of global restoration. But on Restor, Desta gains free information about the species that grow there, the carbon, the water, but most importantly, what he needs is visibility. To funders, to donors, but most importantly, to us, to his customers, who can now see at a glance the incredible footprint of the coffee they're drinking with every single cup they drink. And they can see, using the seed biocomplexity metric, exactly the health of the ecosystems that they're contributing to drinking from, with their purchase. And it's obviously not just Desta that's using this for the same reason. We've got ecotourism projects across Costa Rica, agroforestry projects across the sub-Saharan across Ethiopia, and we've got cooperatives forming all over the world. And by bringing visibility to themselves, they're able to find access to better finance. And this is the critical component in these feedback loops. Across hundreds of thousands of bottom-up local community-led initiatives, they are now getting more and more access to finance through the recovery of ecological restoration. And the astonishing thing is that this now spreads across 160 million hectares of land, where we can all now see and engage with any single project that we'd be interested to. You can buy their products, go on their ecotourism holidays, donate, volunteer, whatever way you'd like to engage, it's now available to the masses. And obviously for us, as scientists, this is an incredibly exciting moment, because for the first time in history, we are now able to track the state of global ecological restoration. And it blows my mind that I'm able to show this. We never anticipated this when we initiated the Restor platform. But across that 160 million hectares of land, there are many projects that are struggling. There are many projects that are failing. But on average, there is a slight and gradual increase in ecological recovery across 160 million hectares. This is the spark, this is the signs of the potential for ecological recovery. And what we're expecting to find is that the ones that are going highest are the ones where they've found that feedback loop between livelihoods and ecological revival. And before I leave you, I'm going to just mention that there is, of course, an even bigger potential in this equation. Of course, if we can bring back nature that revives livelihoods, we are on the way. But actually, there's a bigger potential for intervention that is starting to be realized at the higher edge, sort of higher levels of decision making. This is where we can alleviate the economic drivers of degradation. When people are not forced to degrade the landscapes around them, they can take a moment to find the regenerative solutions that are often better for themselves in the long term. And once again, that feedback loop can start spiraling. When you don't have to degrade the natural capital around you, so often people will find those solutions that bring back the nature that we all so depend on. And this brings me to my favorite part of the Restor process. This is the governments that are using Restor to manage their national interventions. And arguably the most famous of those stories is Costa Rica. I think many of us here are probably familiar with Costa Rica's Payment for Ecosystem Service program. This incredible initiative, about 30 years ago, they had huge levels of deforestation, up to 20% of their forest, 25% of their forests had been left, and they didn't allow that to continue. Instead, by leveraging a fossil fuel tax, they distributed wealth to rural farmers to compensate them for allowing nature to recover. What that's done over the last 30 years is mind-blowing. There's been incredible increases in carbon storage and vegetation cover, but we've never until now been able to see the implications for the ecological integrity of the system. And it's only since they've become visible on the Restor platform that we've been able to send experts out, scientists, to each of these locations to record the soundscapes of ecological revival. And it's giving insights into the potential for national scale recovery. So what you're hearing now is the sound of a natural forest, untouched, one of the 25% that was there and has been there all along. You can hear the high and low frequency sounds of birds and bees and insects. But obviously around 30 years ago, most of the country would have sounded more like this. You don't have to be a scientist to recognize the static of a degraded pasture or degraded landscape. Of course, there are some birds and insects, but the frequency variation is completely depleted. But after 30 years of this incredible intervention, just distributing wealth to alleviate the drivers of degradation, what we hear is that the average soundscape in Costa Rica across these thousands of sites is now like this. What we're hearing is not just the sounds of birds and bees and insects. In the background, you can hear the sounds of howler monkeys. You don't get large-bodied organisms like that unless there's all the nutrients and food and resources that are necessary to support them. Simply by distributing a tiny fraction of their wealth, they've been able to recover this spectacular soundscape across hundreds of thousands of hectares. And it's unbelievable evidence that nature recovery truly is possible at a massive scale. The blue line is 86% of the way towards being the green line, and we're actually publishing this in about 2 weeks' time in the journal Global Change Biology, which we're very excited about, because I think it's the first ever actual data to prove the potential of national scale recovery. But what was also exciting is we also correlated it with sounds of music. The 100,000 most frequently downloaded songs sound statistically closer to this than they do to this. Now, that might sound very wishy-washy and woo-woo, but we've managed to force it into the academic literature because it's actually baked into our evolutionary history. There's no doubt that we've evolved in the soundscapes of ecosystems that provide all the food and nutrients that we need to survive. So it's no surprise that there's very few musical artists out there that have tapped into the sound of static to create their songs. And it absolutely makes sense. But the most incredible thing about this story is that it all happened at a time of economic growth for Costa Rica. 14 times more growth than the money that they put into the story. Now, it's hard to find mechanism for that, but what is clear is that this is evidence that nature can be the economic choice at a national scale. When nature gets baked into the cultural identity of communities, you cannot stop it from reviving at large scales. This was made possible because of Prince William's Earthshot Prize, and we're now encouraging governments to do the same thing, because this isn't an environmental challenge, it's a societal one. If we can find and connect and distribute the wealth of our planet towards those local land stewards across our planet, they are the ones who have the solutions to find the sustainable and the regenerative options that we all need to live on a resilient planet. So please, we welcome you all to join the movement. And if you'd be interested to learn some of the theories underpinning this, my book will be coming out at the end in June this year. So please get in touch, and we'd love any of your feedback. Thank you so much.
Hello. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tom, for that incredible whirlwind tour of the science behind nature, Restor as a platform, the music charts, and also your book at the end, which we're all really looking forward to. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank GreenUp for hosting us today. I cannot see anything in the audience. I think we've got a great audience here to help really understand a bit more, use this platform to share a bit more about Restor, but also the networks that we're working with and showcase the organizations that are on Restor, which Tom just talked about there. And I'm really proud and pleased to introduce our panelists this morning, which are going to help us delve into a bit more detail into something that we are seeing as a consistent theme coming across all of those projects which Tom was talking about. And that is, how do they turn the data that they have and the visibility and the transparency they have using Restor into finance to fuel their efforts? It's the biggest need that they all have. And it's something we really want to dig into in this next phase of Restor's development. So without further ado, if I could invite our panelists. We have Valerie Remoquillo-Jenni, from the CEO of the Fourfold Foundation, a Swiss philanthropy that envisages a healthy and equitable world that respects all forms of life. She oversees a portfolio of philanthropic and impact investing partnerships focused on the economic models for sustainability, food systems transformation, and biodiversity, which is very relevant to what Tom has just presented, of course. She's previously led family offices heading community relations and philanthropy for social agribusinesses, and manage multi-country educational collaborations in both Asia and Europe. Welcome to the panel, Valerie. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'd also like to welcome Jill Huntley, the Managing Director of Accenture's Corporate Citizenship program, setting the direction for corporate citizenship across Accenture's business globally. This includes Accenture's social impact, environmental impact, sustainability, and non-financial reporting. Jill also chairs the Corporate Citizenship Council and serves as president for Accenture's Global Giving Foundation. Welcome and thank you. We've been working with Accenture over the last year or so. I'm really excited to delve into more detail on that partnership. And finally, I'd like to welcome Ignace Beguin. I hope I've not murdered that pronunciation of your name. Ignace is the Executive Director of Mangrove Breakthrough, a really exciting organization that's looking to channel $4 billion worth of finance into 15 million hectares of mangroves by 2030. His expertise is in building global coalitions that can unite businesses, governments, and other stakeholders to drive impact and action. Ignace has also worked with the Ocean Stewardship Council, the Ocean and Coastal Zones Program for the UN High-Level Champions, and in addition to that, he's also established the food systems portfolio under the UN Global Compact. So all very relevant experiences to the community that we're working with, and I think the most exciting thing is that you all represent networks of organizations that are working on this problem that we're talking about, and I think, thank you very much for changing the slides, and I think you've all got a unique perspective on the systemic challenges that these networks of organizations face. So perhaps I can start off with you, Valerie, and go straight into the heart of the problem. Tom talked about the smallholders and getting finance into those smallholders. We know the huge potential that they have. Restoring just 10% of degraded agricultural lands could restore 44 million tons of annual food production and meet nutritional requirements for 154 million people globally. Yet traditional finance typically views them with caution. And I'd like to ask you first about how we kind of address the risk that is associated with these investments and move from sort of perceived risk and start to build systems of trust so we can start to channel finance into these networks of smallholders.
Thank you for the very relevant question. I think many of us here in the audience, many of us are here in Davos in forums that discuss biodiversity. We don't need to overstate the reality that smallholder farmers and many smallholder producers are deemed as very high risk in terms of traditional finance. But maybe first I'd like to check our privilege at the door. The truth is that trust is a two-way street, and funders can also be deemed as very high risk, especially in this climate. Many policymakers change their minds, many governments shift priorities, many funders get scared out of funding what they had previously committed to publicly. So I think when we think about who are really high risk, I think that is actually on both sides, and it's not just on the side of these smallholders. And I think there's also something to be said about not imagining that these smallholders are just blindly willing to take the risk with us and trust us if we are not willing to commit and invest in building partnerships with them. I think it's almost us assuming that surely because they need the money to finance their operations, the restoration work, they're just willing to take it from whoever. There's also a lot of exploitation and greenwashing that happens that I think many conservation groups, many smallholders have also come to realize. So very quickly, I think I want to say in terms of risk, it's actually a two-way street of building trust and credibility, and it's not just the onus of the smallholders. And I think for us to be able to do that as funders, I mean, what do we really care about? We want to be able to demonstrate to our principals as responsible stewards of their wealth that the money that we're allocating to what we said we would do is really going to those communities, and that we have credible, verifiable proof that it's really being implemented with as limited reputational risk to us and as high as impact as possible. This is our logic as funders. The logic of the community is that you are not just here to build, a processing plant for us one day, but you're just going to pull it out halfway through the construction, and you're not going to support us when bad weather happens. So it's actually an agreement on both sides to be willing to invest the time, the resources, and also the commitment to stay the course. I think that's the first thing we imagine in terms of building trust. And the second one is the power of strong networks. I think there is very limited capacity, even for the most sophisticated philanthropic foundations, to go and find every single farm in every single part of the world. I wish we had that kind of leverage and the kind of resource, but we don't. So we need to be able to trust, in a way, very important and credible intermediaries such as Restor to be able to give us the data. That's one thing. We need as well from the side of the farmers to know that it's very hard for them to trust a Swiss entity that's really far away from them. They actually trust local leaders and local organizations. So it's about also helping them strengthen their local movements and their local leadership and governance, and finding an alliance within these structures of multi-level governance to work together. And the last note, if I may, Tom, say about this, because this week in Davos has also seen a cascade of information around innovations around AI to be able to help us actually do much more sophisticated as well mapping of territories really with the granularity. What I would say as a funder is that we shouldn't really also use the complexity of data as a proxy for trust. I think we also have to realize that how much capacity do we have to actually also absorb all that data ourselves, or really using that to make the relevant decisions that we're doing as funders. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Valerie. Yeah, I think that point around networks, when we first started Restor, it started as a data platform. How do we democratize access to the data that is locked up within academic literature? But what we quickly realized through the prototyping session was that actually they wanted to be connected they wanted to find people that are locally, exactly as you say. That was actually a hidden value, and trying to unlock that and formalize that as we move forward could be so powerful. Ignace, if I can just move to you next and talk a bit about the metrics that Valerie touched on, that last point. You're obviously trying to unlock billions in capital for mangrove ecosystems. And global capital, as we all know, loves simplified spreadsheets, simplified metrics. And how are you thinking about building good frameworks for monitoring that, don't overcomplicate it, but again, don't ignore the complexities that exist on the ground?
Through Restor.
Correct answer.
No, but I don't know if the mic works here. No, but it's true. So the mangrove breakthrough is, just to explain a little bit how we arrive to that level of engagement with Restor and the need for our partners for this detailed level of data and the transparency that Restor is bringing. We convene a group of over 40 governments at the ministerial level, covering about 60% of the world's mangrove. Last week, Indonesia formally joined the initiative. 25% of mangrove globally. We've convened NGO through the Global Mangrove Alliance, as well as global financial institutions, insurance, asset managers, and project developers, with the objective, as Tom said, to restore and protect 15 million of hectares by 2030. But from the start, we put it finance mobilization to the core. And we have an objective of creating the conditions for mobilizing $4 billion. And really what is at the core of the mangrove breakthrough is to shift how does government and financial institutions are valuing mangrove as a key asset to build resilient economies and communities. So we work on, many different aspects around training financial institutions, in Southeast Asia, in Latin America. We work with the governments a lot on NDCs last year. We developed, financial investment strategy with Indonesia and Mexico, for instance. We develop specific KPIs and financial, models or instruments that can apply the value of mangrove into risk mitigation and assessment from financial institutions. What is very important for us is, first of all, for financial institutions to understand, and government, that without mangrove, their communities and economies are much more at risk. And in this journey, and we've designed credit lines, mangrove transition bond, and we've engaged in many conversations in Philippines, Indonesia, Brazil, Colombia, etc. And there is an appetite, right? I think financial institutions, not yet so much publicly anymore, but still really understand their dependencies of nature. And mangrove is a critical, I think, also kind of a blueprint on how you can connect the value of nature to an institution like a commercial banks, an asset manager, or governments, because it's bringing powerful on mitigation, but it's also about your food security, it's about your adaptation and resilience, it's about the water quality. And at that level of conversation, we quickly hit the wall where we were not able to go to a granularity of identifying project and pipeline, investable, working with the HSBC in Mexico, other institution in the Philippines, other institution in Indonesia. And this is where the partnership with Restor is really critical, is that we are able, through the broad convening power of the mangrove breakthrough, to provide a global map of where are mangrove project, mangrove-related investments available now. We will be able to track progress over time. We will bring transparency, access to data. And this is what financial institutions need for them to inform better decision making. And so for us, it's very exciting to have access to this platform. We have 250 projects at least that will join the platform Restor in the coming weeks. And when we will go in countries this year to work with asset managers and financial institutions, Restor will be a critical asset to give them the tools to understand that their portfolio will be less at risk if they are able to price and value mangrove in any investment they are doing, in coastal agriculture, in fisheries, in aquaculture, new ports, new roads on the coast. So really, Restor is a fundamental pillar for shifting this financial system that the mangrove breakthrough is trying.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And yeah, we launched our first call for projects with Mangrove Breakthrough in December last year, and it's just amazing to see the geospatial map of degraded mangroves, and we're now seeing it being populated with little projects popping up, and it's really exciting to see that movement start. Perhaps, Jill, if I can move to you next, talking about our partnership with Accenture Corporate Citizenship team, which has been fantastic, initially it started as trying to think about the restoration workforce. You know, there is an economy that is growing, that is set to double by 2030, and you guys actually identified, you know, there is a lack of workforce data. We surveyed Restor's community in Latin America to really get a better understanding of workforce. And one of the big things that came out of that was actually with regards to some of the funders that we were talking to, and their sort of communication to us that their biggest predictor of success when it comes to restoration and conservation is actually the people behind the project, the leadership behind the organization and the infrastructure. Yet we don't really have standardized ways of evaluating that quickly. There's a lot of due diligence associated with it, and I'd be interested to get your perspective, Jill, working across many different industries, of how you see ways that we can sort of build those processes to better evaluate, you know, the people aspects of restoration without sort of overburdening local communities.
Thanks, Tom. And perhaps just before I answer that question, just to sort of acknowledge that I realise I'm in a room full of ecological and climate experts, and that is definitely not where I come from. And as Tom said, we've been working with Restor really around the human aspects and figuring out how to integrate that aspect effectively into the Restor platform. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot about the other side of the equation, but my background is really in looking at skilling and talent, and Accenture has spent more than a decade working on those kinds of programs. So I guess the great thing about that research is that we're at the point of not asking whether, or, you know, if we should be incorporating this, the human aspects of this, but really how. And I can't tell you how many conversations I find myself in the context of Accenture's sort of work with the tech industry and with our clients who are looking at tech. I can't tell you how many conversations there are that start with a reminder that the people have to be at the center of the tech. So it's fantastic to be in a conversation where we're really talking about how to make the integration of the people side of things work. And so I think the first thing to say is that we need to treat human capability as a critical part of the infrastructure. It's not a bolt-on extra that we, you know, it's not an afterthought. It needs to be a constant part of the investment infrastructure and so on. And that starts with translating it into some clear metrics. And I mean, Valerie, you mentioned that we have to think carefully about which metrics we want and what data we want, because it doesn't necessarily need to be a lot. It needs to be clear and focused. It needs to be linked to outcomes, and it needs to be consistent, because what we need is some standardization and a common language that can be used across all these projects and programs across many countries, and of course across partners and funders and investors. So a small or focused and consistent set of metrics that acknowledges the human factors as critical infrastructure. Second thing I would say is that we can use the technology to create digital credentials. So again, Valerie, you referred to trust and the need to build trust, and the credentials, you can do that via the technology. You can capture the trust signals in the data and use that as a way of validating and accrediting the activities and the projects. And the last thing I would say is just creating stronger partnerships across all of these different players in the space who are focused on the people aspects, retaining agency in the communities, and being able to surface these investable projects and programs.
Thank you so much. And yeah, like you say, there are many other organizations in this space talking about the same stuff, and a lot of it, I think, is about partnerships, as you say, bringing those getting consistency across the different partnerships so we're on the same page. And then sort of on that theme, Valerie, maybe I can ask you, like, data really is the key to unlocking finance, or it feels like it is, particularly when we speak to a lot of community projects. We with Accenture, we did some workshopping with Brazilian communities, and they were getting their funding pulled because they had no data, which is, it's just not culturally how they work. And so just how do we flip the dynamic so that monitoring and data actually empowers these communities rather than being seen as a tax on what they're doing? Like, have you seen good examples of that happening, or do you have ideas about how that could be improved?
Well, again, I think this goes back to having a very respectful, clear, consistent kind of partnership. And I think this is where we're trying to avoid being extractive, exploitative, and rather really using data as kind of this entry point to engage deeper with the community. We need the data, no doubt, because we need more sophisticated financing to come in. But nonetheless, I think what I'm going to adopt what was like from the speech of Mark Carney this week. He said it has to be principled and at the same time pragmatic. And I think this is this is the kind of approach we need to have with data, with these communities, because I think we have to meet them where they're at, while at the same time helping to build their capacity, IMM monitoring capacities, to be able to be in this open highway of nature finance. So I think this is where philanthropies can come in. We've invested quite a lot in technical assistance work that really is not necessarily just going to investing in a project, but investing in the people, in organizational skills, in leadership, to be able to navigate this new world where we will have to exchange on biodiversity credits, carbon credits, all forms of nature credits, and somebody in a team wherever in the world should be able to navigate or help them navigate that complexity.
Fantastic. And I should also say a massive thank you to you and Fourfold Foundation for supporting the development of the Seed Index. As Tom mentioned on there, I don't know if anyone isn't aware, it's a way of sort of biodiversity, of course, is inherently incredibly complex. And so the scientists at the Crowther lab were able to come up with a way to compress all of that complexity into a single 0-to-1 measure, which we think is going to take a big step towards getting better trust in a standardized measure. Jill, if I can come to you on this aspect of capacity constraints. The survey also noted that we did together that 69% of restoration organizations are relying in some form on volunteers, 80% cite that finance is their biggest bottleneck. So in your view, how do we move from a model that's less informal and reliant on volunteerism to a sort of professional, investable restoration workforce that's delivering long-term ecological value and jobs?
I guess first of all, just to say thank goodness for volunteers, right? Because that is what makes a lot of it work. But that doesn't mean that it can't be professionalized and, again, standardized and structured in the way that human capability and capacity can be brought to bear. And so we've been working with Restor to do that, to codify the job pathways, the skill profiles, and roles of people who are working in this space, with a view to, in effect, professionalizing the space. And this is something that we've done in other areas of the sort of rising green jobs space. In the US, we have worked with a number of organizations to open up pathways to jobs for young people in some of the new clean tech areas, so EV charging, solar panel installation, HVAC systems and so on. There's a real demand for talent and jobs in that space, and a real shortage of skills and credentials and accreditation. And so, we see the potential in the ecology restoration space to do the same thing and to create these structures and frameworks which will allow people to understand the pathways ahead of them. It'll allow investors to see the professionalization and the investability of those teams and those programs. And I think it's not as common in this space perhaps as it is in others, but there are plenty of transferable lessons and frameworks that we can use. And I'd say the other thing is to really be capturing, using data and these systems and the platforms like Restor to capture the labour market signals and data that will allow for quick response in these human capital framework. So, how do you quickly respond to a change in the need for skills or opportunities in particular types of jobs versus others? How do you localize that into the regions and into the communities? So there's potential there too.
Fantastic. And Ignace, maybe I can, talking about that kind of social aspects of it, like of course, mangroves are like carbon superstars. I think they store 5 times more carbon per hectare than a tropical forest. But I think you've often argued that actually the biggest value is the resilience they bring. And I wondered if you could maybe share some examples where you've seen this work well in kind of building resilience, not only ecologically but also socially.
Sure. I mean, there are hundreds of examples, but that's, first of all, for us, this so-called narrative is really critical, right? To shift the way on how capital markets and governments are valuing mangrove ecosystems. We need to really move from just the value of the trees into what these trees are bringing in terms of security for my communities, in terms of food security, right? There is a lot of work going on into the value of mangrove and other coastal ecosystems to bring more resilience, seafood and aquatic food value chain, which ultimately make coastal communities much more resilient and healthy. It's also about, obviously, adaptation, right? We know for coastal agriculture that if mangrove are cut, for instance, in Indonesia to grow palm oil or coffee, we know this is potentially, good for the first few years in terms of crops, but in the 5 to 6 years, the salinity of the soil is growing, and this is really exactly like Tom Crowther was saying, going back into the poverty loop. And there have been some solutions. Yesterday we were with the team at with René and Jonas from Blue U, exactly, who have some amazing shrimp farm which are restoring mangrove, and they have proven that these shrimps are much more providing much more healthy and good revenues for the producers, because there is much more lower cost. You don't need entrance, you don't need fertilizers, you don't need to fish the shrimp, or much less. They are higher quality shrimps, so you can sell them with a better premium while recovering and protecting ecosystems. So I think what I've seen in the journey, and now where I'm very excited with working with Restor, that we are going into a level of sophistication, into valuing nature, into exactly what example I've given of our coastal agriculture, for aquaculture. We are talking to railroads, ports, infrastructure developers, because nature, and in this case mangrove, are really a natural infrastructure. And if we can really embed that fully in any decision making, this will be a shift. And this sophistication is really critical, and Restor is allowing us, through the mapping, through the identification of projects, through the tracking and monitoring impact, what the financial institutions are needing. And here in Davos, in every conversation, we brought in the partnership with Restor that really gave, again, another level of maturity and sophistication. So we really hope that in the coming years, institution will really size the power of mangrove, and overall, obviously, the value of nature in maintaining our economic systems.
That's a fantastic note to finish on. I know we're short on time, so thank you so much, Ignace. A great example of an organization. It shows that the opportunities are there, the businesses are forming, the catalytic capital is ready to kind of support those businesses. But of course, we're not done yet, and we have to measure the social aspects and ensure it's delivering green jobs for local people. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to the next session. So for this next session, we have a round of case studies we're going to share from the Restor network. And first of all, I would like to introduce, I don't need to look at my pad, I've got them on the screen. So we have, I'll introduce the three of them all at once, and I'll let you each come up, one after the other, Bremnes. So we've got Thomas Gass from Alliance Sufosec. It's an incredible NGO based in Switzerland. Welcome, Thomas, that's coordinating and reducing costs for NGOs by sharing infrastructure that already exists. We have Rebecca Berlinger, the co-founder of the Rocket Foundation, showing how they are using Restor to support more projects. And also we have Hallvard Bremnes from Givaudan. Thomas, I'll let you kick off first with your presentation. I have the clicker here if you work your way through. And then once you've finished, we'll have the next
Thank you very
Rebecca
much.
coming up.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Tom. So another Thomas. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for having me here on the panel this afternoon. I work with the Swiss NGO Alliance for Sustainable Food Systems and Empowered Communities. My background is monitoring and evaluation. I represent the Alliance today. And the Alliance actually consists of, started in 2020, joining resources, joining efforts to tackle hunger worldwide. And they started off with the objective to strengthen local food systems. They grew within the last 5 years to a network of up to 300 partner organizations in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. And just to shortly, briefly present the organizations, the members in the Alliance, it's Swiss Aid. They are actually experts in promoting indigenous seeds and crops. There is Fast in Action. They consider the food and nutrition a basic human right. There is Vétérinaires Sans Frontières. They support pastoralist communities in sustainable livestock management. Then we have Vivamos in the Alliance, mainly working in Latin America on nutrition and healthy nutrition and food for children and women. Then Aqualimenta and Scott Foundation, two smaller Swiss NGOs in the field of rural water supply. And what they share, or the unique thing about this alliance really is the complementarity of the members and of the 300 partners worldwide, whilst at the same time they share a common goal, which is improving food security, restoring, maintaining, protecting ecosystems in their program area. And they started off, as I said, with trying to improve food security during the time of pandemic and the global food crisis between 2020 and 2023. And if you look at the context, the map, this FAO map shows where hunger and food security are most prevalent worldwide. Measured through an indicator used by FAO that the Alliance then took on and uses in its program as well, all contributing to the Sustainable Development Goal number 2, which is zero hunger. Now, smallholder families and households, they are at the very core of the Alliance program, because they are at the same time, they are at the center of agri-food, of resilient agri-food systems, whilst they're also most vulnerable to extreme weather events, to climate change, to degraded soils and water. So what we do is we monitor closely every year the livelihoods and food security of smallholder families. We carry out a survey, a household survey among 10,000 families every year, and we monitored in the last 5 years that through the pandemic and the global food crisis, the Alliance interventions contributed to a decreased food insecurity and to the dissemination and uptake of agroecological practices. Now, whilst we have our monitoring tool to track change at household level, we were lacking a tool and a platform and a methodology to monitor at ecosystem and landscape level. And that's how we found Restor. That's what led us into a partnership with Restor very recently. Restor is the perfect match for the Alliance to not only visualize the projects and measure certain indicators in the ecosystems of the smallholders, but also to aggregate what the Alliance, the quite complex system of the Alliance is doing. We are early adopters of Restor Insights that allows creating portfolios of projects, aggregating data, and we're very excited to now launch Restor during the upcoming second phase. We're actually having onboarding sessions next week with Maxime and Estefania and colleagues of your team, Tom. So very excited, and it brings us, Restor allows us then to kind of come to a holistic impact monitoring, combining household level and landscape level data. Yeah, thank you very much. That's the case of Sufosec. Thanks.
Do I have a clicker as well? So I have the clicker microphone notes dilemma, but I'll make it work. So my name's Rebecca Berlinger. I run a Swiss philanthropic foundation that's really focused on impact. We support a portfolio of projects around the world, but what we're really focused on is community-led ecosystem restoration projects. And the kind of projects that we look for are the projects that look at environmental challenges, social challenges, and economic challenges together. Because we believe when you look at these three core pillars, that's when you can really lead to transformative change. When you consider all these things together, that's how you really lead to sustainable impact. So I just want to talk about one of the projects that we're supporting, and I'm then going to use that to kind of explain how we're using the Restor platform. So we're working with a project in India, an incredibly degraded landscape. They have severe water shortages, there's been mass deforestation, and the soil is totally degraded. What that means is that there's basically no farming. No farming means no food. It also means no livelihoods. The ecological degradation leads to social breakdown. Now, whilst that's a really sad story, on the positive side, when you start addressing that ecological degradation, you can also totally transform the social systems there. So you can lead to food security, livelihoods, and really build resilience in the communities that depend on that land. So this is the kind of landscape that we're looking at. It's incredibly dry and very little grows there. What we're doing here is really simple. Oh, and it doesn't work. I wanted to show you a beautiful, beautiful image of what we're doing, but basically, we're collecting water using kind of natural water retention structures that hold the water. So the monsoon rain comes, and instead of being washed away, it's held. This provides a water source for the communities. It enables agriculture. It enables reforestation. It enables ecosystem restoration, and it totally changes the lives of the communities living there. We have this beautiful drone footage which shows what we're doing and shows the impact, and it's really, really powerful. But it still doesn't answer the questions. Now I can do nothing. Hang on a minute. I go back. Right. These are the questions that we get from donors. And we see this from both sides, because we go out and find projects, and then we go and fundraise for them. So we kind of do the due diligence, and then we are due diligenced. The questions we get: why here? Why am I going to fund this project on the other side of the world, God knows where, and. Does it really work? It sounds super simple. If it's so simple, it's kind of too good to be true. And will the impact really last? These questions are really hard to answer, and they're hard to answer when they're community-led projects who don't have data, who don't have people kind of collecting everything that's needed. And this means that funding doesn't get to these projects, and these projects have absolutely unbelievable potential. This is when Restor comes in. So before, when I was talking about projects, I was saying, we're doing a project in Rajasthan, in the Beguin region, and people, it really doesn't hit home with people. What hits home is when you can zoom in on a map and you can show them where you're talking about. You can draw a line around the work that you're doing and show them the communities, the landscape, and. They can go and look at this on their own, and suddenly it becomes much more real. If you see at the bottom, this is a screenshot from Restor, there are these time kind of data stamps. You can look at satellite images over time. They can go and do this independently. So this means when I take a piece of work that we've done, I can show them before, I can show them afterwards, and I can show them into the future. It's really hard for you to see this on the screen, but you can really see the difference that these interventions make. And this answers the does it really work question way better than any slide deck can. Twinned with that, Restor gives you scientific data. This is independent scientific data over time that shows, for example, carbon, evapotranspiration, ground coverage, and. This is stuff that projects just can't access. And it's a total game changer when talking with funders. So this is our project. So we've mapped it out on Restor. We've then mapped individual elements where we're actually doing work. So this is kind of the short-term and the long-term impact. This is one of the, I can't show you the beautiful footage that I do have, but this is basically one of the water structures that we built. We have some drone footage, so we're really lucky. But what's going to be really, really powerful is when I can show them time-stamped satellite images today, next year, the year after, the year after. This is how you bring funders on a journey. This is how you make them a part of it and make them really understand what it is that you're doing. So these are some of the landscapes that we're working on. We're mapping them all out in Restor. We've got photos, but that is not the same as having scientific data. So when you twin that scientific data with the photos, with the indices that you were talking about, kind of from on the ground, this is really, really powerful. This gives funders the confidence that they need. It gives them the data that they need, and. The other thing quickly to mention is metrics. Restor is now adding another feature whereby communities on the ground can input metrics into the system. These are some of the metrics that we look at. Metrics for community-led projects are something that's really difficult. They don't know what data they should be collecting. They don't know how to report it, and. Restor is giving them a framework. It's telling them what to start looking at. It's telling them what to put into there. And the funders on the other side then have access to all this data in one place. When you put all these things together, it's seriously powerful. So in summary, anyone can go and put a project onto Restor. You can map out the area that you're working, and suddenly the data is available. The data is available going back, and the data will be available going forward. And it's really, for funders, bringing them closer to projects, letting them see what is really happening on the ground, and then this scientific kind of independent data level. This is amazing. And as Tom kind of talked about earlier, there's so many of these projects all over the world that are really, really fundable. And when you start giving them access to this stuff, let's hope that we can get the funding going to them. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That is fantastic. Really powerful examples of how Rebecca is helping to skill up projects in the value chain and bring more transparency and visibility to their efforts. Now, I'd like to invite Bremnes up onto the stage, the head of sustainability for Givaudan. Now, you're working at the other end of the supply chain, a really powerful mission-driven organization that is also thinking about transparency, visibility, and importantly, traceability, understanding where our products come from.
Well, thank you for having me today. So good afternoon. So I'm going to talk about a few things, but most importantly, showing what private sector is doing. We are not, generating carbon credits for markets and stuff. We are doing actions out there because we are, we have boots on the ground and we source a lot of materials. So what is Givaudan? Givaudan is a public company, a business-to-business company, headquartered in Switzerland, 7 billion turnover. 17,000 employees. But all in all, we are mission-driven, purpose-driven. And in our industry that creates, flavors and fragrance, beautiful perfumes for our customers that are B2C, the big brands, flavor applications, in most cases, we are very big in a small world. For example, in the world of patchouli, that is a very known ingredient for fine fragrance, we are big. But today, I'm going to talk about an example where we are tiny in a gigantic world. And I'm going to talk about palm oil. So I heard you mention palm oil before, heavily criticized because it's under the radar. But palm oil, you can see the palm fruit, it's a superfruit, is something used extensively everywhere. In beauty and applications, for example, in food. And to give you an idea, everyone in the world will consume or use about 7 kilograms of palm oil every year. So just calculate the number of people on the earth and you time it by 7. It gives you the sheer amount of this oil. If you have like a more local comparison, in Switzerland we tend to eat 8 kilograms of chocolate per year, per capita. So it's not gigantic, but there are not so many Swiss people. So you can see that palm oil is a big thing. And why it's important, because it's a vegetable oil that has fantastic properties. And it's like olive oil and walnut oil and all kinds of things. There are many types of derivatives you can create with them. It looks like that. It's like there's a seed, the kernel, and then there's the pulp. So it's kind of a mushy type of fruit. These fruits are being crushed in mills to extract the oil, and then you get all this full suite of ingredients from it. Why do we use it? So we in the industry use it for applications like soaps. The foaming agent, a soap bar is made of mostly palm oil. Huh? You know what we call glycerin? It's palm oil. Just let this sink in. We tend to not think about it. But we also use it to replace, some other fatty acids. In a biscuit, the mouthfeel. It's very important to get fatty acids in there. So it's a power fruit. It's a really impressive type of oil. But now, how does this connect with monitoring and even satellites? You can see on this slide. Like everything, if you assume things are well done, I think we are in a bad place. In life, you need to have some method. When you source 11,000 raw materials, you need a system, you need an approach to ensure that what is taking place at the start of our product is done well. And done well is inclusive of all its aspects, environment, social, communities, etc. So what is happening? So 10 years ago, even if we were very, very, very small in a gigantic world in palm oil, we decided to partner. Because partnership is a new leadership. Huh? That's the thing. There's one thing to take away from Davos is this tagline. We teamed up with a fantastic organization called the Earthworm Foundation, doing landscape projects in situ, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, where we source most of our palm oil. Why was that important? Because in the same geographies, you have companies like tire companies that source rubber, some others source timber. So imagine by mutualizing all of these companies and interests, etc., you work together through an organization. And this is what we did. And this work led to the first part of this case study, traceability. Everything starts with traceability. So over 10 years, we have worked, and we now have 80% traceability of the palm oil we buy down to the mill, the mill that crushed the fruits. 60% to plantations. And then you can say, yeah, but they are not such a big numbers. I put these very tiny footnotes here. We use and source from 1,734 mills. So when you think about traceability exercise, you can imagine the number of plantations, smallholders, communities around. So it's a big, big deal. And great news, we have been able to have landscape projects with a lot of positive impact for the environment, to combat deforestation, and for social and community positive impact. But it's not good enough. Because when you, traceability is a mean to an end, it's not the end result. So we had to do something else. And we use technology today, through these partnerships, using satellite imagery for one very important reason. Traceability of the palm oil supply chain gives us where the mills are. In the business of palm oil extracts, you cannot be really economically profitable if your plantation is so distant from the mill. Because you transport the fruit, it gets damaged, etc. So if you take each mill and you plot a 50-kilometer radius around this mill, I can guarantee you, and that's the method we have chosen, with this coalition, that no truck can travel more than 100 kilometers in these geographies because it's rocky and bumpy. For those who have been to Malaysia or Indonesia, yeah, it's adventure. So if you think 100 kilometers is the maximum distance that a truck can travel, you take a 50 kilometers radius around every single of these 1,734 mills, and it gives you a geography, an area. And then you look what happens beyond. Because if you see changes beyond, it means there is land use change. There is something happening. There are new mills being set in places maybe close to primary forest. But can you also monitor to see where there are positive changes? I heard of a lot of positive restoration activities. So it's not only more of the bad things, you can have a lot of more of the good things. And in this process, what happens is we initiate grievance mechanisms, monitoring and trigger points, and we ensure that people on the ground, and not people sitting in Switzerland, go check what's going on in this radius. Because when we have mapped all the plantations and the mills, if there is no land use change nor encroaching into primary forest, it means that there is no deforestation. It means that you can engage with certification, with RSPO. You can have, better impacts. And some of them are here. Economic, social, and environmental value. You preserve, we restore, we ensure things are done well. Grievance cases, the world is not honky-dory. There's a lot of bad things happening out there. So there are two types of companies. Companies that do not go into these areas, and the ones that stays there and combat the problems. Givaudan is part of the latter. We are there because the world is better with us on the ground here. The grievance cases are very important because in everything you do, it's not just about carbon footprint and social, etc. It's about working practices and a lot of things like that, water stewardship. This work and all these proof points we accumulate in this process gives us an opportunity to reduce scope 3, both for corporate inventory, but also for product carbon footprint. So in the room, if you're interested about this, I can talk for an hour, but I don't have time for that. So what happens is like when we can demonstrate proof points, we can remove, for example, the land use change perimeter in the emission factor, because you have a proof point that you are not encroaching in primary forest and so on and so on. And it goes the other way around. If you restore and reforest, you can also capture this, following the GHG protocol, the flag guidance for the ones that are very engaged into scope 3. I can see there are a few people that are nodding and understand the complexity of all this work. This helps us progress, the commitments for no deforestation, no peat, no exploitation, the European deforestation regulation. I'm the EUDR compliance officer for Givaudan, so you can imagine I have skin in the game in this process. And satellite monitoring, GPS coordinates, makes or breaks this journey in EUDR. And of course, deforestation and conversion-free supply chains engagement that we have made in Givaudan. It's not easy, but that's why we're doing it. But how does all of this traceability monitoring connect with finance? You know, you look at the even the invite, you know, how does it connect? For us, you know, we are very pragmatic. For us, we don't have like funds that injects millions or billions into carbon credits where we don't operate. We only work in our supply chain. And for us, the traceability monitoring helps us ensure that we work with the right suppliers, that we work and solidify the relationships. And this is how a business ensures the capital is going in the right direction. It doesn't mean it's perfect, but at least this is real. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. Bremnes, really powerful example there of how just understanding where your business operates, you can have a huge impact. And many of the organizations or companies that we talk to often don't even know where they're operating. And so really, really great to understand how you can go into more depth on that and have a real impact. And as you say, the movement, the restoration movement cannot be philanthropically funded forever. We need to understand, you know, how we can start to integrate it into value chains that already exist. There are already millions of people out there that are working with nature because their lives and livelihoods depend on it. And as Tom, one of my favorite quotes of Tom's is that no one is greenwashing their own back garden. You know, these are local communities that live there, that are operating in these supply chains. Of course, they're not going to greenwash because they value those ecosystem services. Their businesses depend on it. And I've just put this up here just to show of all, whether it is a corporate supply chain, or it is the government of Costa Rica and their payment for ecosystem services program, or even the projects that Rebecca and Thomas are supporting around the world to get onto that finance journey. You know, we're all working towards this bigger goal. There is now 258,000 projects on Restor, over 196 countries. As Tom showed, we're able, with independent science, to show the gradual improvement in the health of those ecosystems since the date of intervention was registered on Restor, which is just so powerful to see at that scale, 168 million hectares. And we've now got 66 million hectares being reported to the Global Biodiversity Framework. So local communities can now show how they are contributing to the goals and targets that have been set by their national governments, which is just really powerfully connecting the bottom-up movement to the global goals that we have. That's really, really fantastic to see. But we know that they are critically underfunded, and 86% of the projects, it's why we're all here today, and many of you have come to this session, I'm sure. It's how we can start to connect that community of nature stewards to different financing mechanisms. And I think one thing I've taken from WEF this week is seeing just there are so many different financial instruments, financial platforms emerging that have solved this problem for different parts, different geographies, different parts of the supply chain. And that is really, I know this is a very complex diagram with a lot of logos, but it was really just to demonstrate the number of organizations that we are working with, and it's just a fraction. But to give you a few examples, we've managed to figure out ways to share projects with the G20 and the Global Land Initiative. We had a grant-making program with them last year to connect great stewards of nature to about 100,000 in financing. We've worked with companies on measuring nature positive in their supply chain and the pilot process. How can you use all of the remote sensing information to understand whether the state of nature in your supply chain, and also what projects and NGOs are working on restoring and protecting those landscapes that you're working with. And then finally, I also wanted to mention another great example. I think he's in the audience, but Adrian Ward from Accounting for Nature is working on how can they monitor projects that are put on the balance sheet according to the standards that they've developed. They're using Restor's technology to make sure those projects can be recognized on company balance sheets. So that movement is growing, and this audience, I'm sure, can help us get there. And so we'd love to hear from you if you're able to sort of collaborate and help us build this and connect this bottom-up movement. Finally, I think, you know, we can turn projects from invisible to visible, build trust at scale, and really capture the momentum we need to make nature the economic choice so it can thrive for us all. I'll leave you with that. We've got 2 QR codes to support our mission. Restor is a nonprofit. We're now fundraising to build that operating system that I talked about. And I don't know whether this goes to Tom's book again, or that's our homepage. But yeah, please come and speak to us afterwards. It's been a pleasure. Thank you to all of the guests who've contributed to the session today. Much appreciated. And I'll let you go back. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Restor team and your speakers for this very inspiring session. I invite you all to join the foyer and continue the discussion there. Have all a very nice afternoon, and thank you very much.